Greetings, everybody. I'm going to give it a couple minutes for any stragglers to come on. We are at 6 o'clock, so again, I won't delay us too long, but I'll give it just a couple minutes here. I will take the opportunity to ask if you can see my screen. You can just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Thank you. All right, well, we'll get started, you guys. Welcome everybody, and thanks for logging in and tuning in for our discussion this evening. So for those of you I don't know, I'm Ellen Shadle. I'm the principal planner for the city of Jamestown, and we are taking steps towards the adoption of a local preservation ordinance. And so tonight's discussion is just to kind of give you some background and information and some context on all that might entail. Well, at least some of it, not all of it, because it's still a work in progress, of course. So yeah, so I'm going to open with these sentiments otherwise, that because of the affirming support for and response to the establishment of historic neighborhoods in Jamestown, the city is taking steps to establish a local preservation ordinance, otherwise known as an LPO, which I will refer to it as we go through things. An LPO will provide our valuable building stock with legal protections that federal statutes do not address, basically. That's the big distinction. An LPO expands the city's toolbox in saving meaningful structures, having the ability to explore a range of options in addressing an unsightly or unsafe structure. The city is committed to striving for positive outcomes that result from honoring private property rights concurrently with the realization of goals for our community at large. So just to give some context as to kind of what the background of this is, Jamestown has the oldest building stock in the region in terms of Western New York. Of Jamestown's 14,000 plus parcels and over 9,000 residential buildings, 96% of them are older than 50 years old, 78% are older than 75 years old, and 59% of our building stock is older than 100 years old. And so that is certainly a milestone on any measure. So there's a couple things that this tells us. Truth number one, these are places that hold valuable history, stories, and character simply by virtue of the fact that they have survived so far. Truth number two is that these are also places and spaces that may be subject to long-term vacancy, abandonment, or deterioration due to disinvestment and neglect. So really our challenge is what we call VADs, vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties. And they don't get like that overnight. There's a process that they go through to get to this point. And so it really starts with neglected maintenance or updates to the property, which turns them into what we all typically refer to as eyesores in the neighborhood. And those eyesores are certainly unpleasant to look at, and they also might be starting to be unpleasant to live in as well. And so this unpleasantness basically diminishes their appeal, or simply it results in a loss of appeal. And then we typically see that accompanied by the emergence of safety issues. So it's not just whether it's pretty or ugly, now it's a question of physical safety. And so the property becomes unsafe to live in. And so now that property has a diminished function or a complete loss of function. And so if it doesn't function, now we just can't even use it. And so when that property loses it has a loss of use, we've really got a couple of options. We can either restore and reuse that property, or we can demolish it. And a lot of times this is what we call demolition by neglect, in terms of really where the source of this loss of use can be unpacked to. And so what that can look like really in real life, so the same process is that, we've got a building that starts out, just fine. And as it moves through any neglect or disinvestment, we kind of wind up here, the eyesore. It's unpleasant. It's not very appealing. It's probably not very safe anymore. It doesn't function anymore. The electric is out, the plumbing is out, so we can't even use it. And so we've got a couple of options with a property like this. Again, we can restore it, or we can demolish it, which is unfortunate. Similarly, you look at structures like this, and it's hard to believe that anyone would not maintain them, they wouldn't invest in them. But again, if that's not what happens, we kind of go through that process, and what remains is something that is like this. And this is the structure that still remains. And imagine if those structures were still with us. These are not structures in Jamestown, these are just examples otherwise. And so I wanted to take the opportunity for a little bit of a poll. And this is my first time, really. Here we are. So I'm going to launch my polling. And with a building like this, what would you choose to do? Would you rehab it, or would you demolish it? And I'll wait for some responses to that. So we've got 1 for demolish, 3 for rehab. Okay, I'll wait for a couple more responses. But so far, the majority would rehab it. Great. And whoops, let's do that. I'll share the results there. Okay. And you would have been, let me get out of this. And, oh dear. There we go. They rehabbed it. So that's nice. So again, I will launch our poll. There we go. Rehab or demo? 1 for demo, 1 for rehab, 2 for rehab, 3 for rehab. Okay, and I'll show you what the decision of this building was. Got 3 for rehab. Good. And they rehabbed it. And I'll give you 1 more. So, rehab or demo? I need to get that out of the way. Seeing my screen. 3 for rehab. This is a popular one. rehab. Five for rehab. Wow. All right. Excellent. Whoops. Share those results. And it was rehabbed. So we have some preservationists among us this evening. So keeping in mind in terms of what is possible, again, as much as something can be an eyesore, as much as it can be unsafe, it doesn't function, it's not very appealing, it doesn't necessarily have to mean the end of its useful life completely. So we've got, the tool that we want to apply here is preservation. And just by definition, we're talking about just the maintenance, restoration, or rehabilitation of a structure that sustains that structure's useful life beyond the impact of neglect, substandard work, or questionable designs, such as these places in Jamestown once upon a time. And so the objective of preservation is simply to ensure that a structure or an area can be used and enjoyed not just today, but also in the future. Because otherwise, this is what happens. And that's basically the area before that. I'll show that again. So here's what Brooklyn Square, if you can see, I'll get my cursor over here, if you can see the rail bridge there. And then once they took out almost close to 150 structures to open that up. And then, I don't know if anyone knows this structure today, this structure is our CVS in Brooklyn Square. So preservation, of course, takes us into historic preservation, which is simply taking all the elements of general building preservation and giving that preservation just a broader context and a deeper narrative. Every city has a story to tell, and an integral character of that story is its buildings. The loss of our buildings changes the story of Jamestown. It unwinds our efforts for progress, and it unravels the threads that originally knit Jamestown's fabric. There's absolutely nothing wrong with new construction when it is done with intention and reflection about balancing the past and the future. New buildings can create unintended consequences of not only erasing history, but rewriting history. So we want preservation and progress to be two symbiotic sides of the same coin. And one of the great things about historic preservation is that it is a proven community stabilizer. The emphasis on economic growth and community prosperity contributes to the perception that a city starts and ends at its business and employment opportunities. And this leaves out a significant part of the story being untold. And this image is of Jamestown. I think you can see that up in the corner of the border of Lakeview Avenue. Preserving our buildings allows stories to continue, endure, and evolve, enabling Jamestown to provide residents, workers, and visitors both something to return to and to discover. And so we might think historic preservation is about stopping time and freezing something in the past. But in fact, historic preservation today, as well as in the past, has always been about managing change. So again, just in terms of trying to kind of clarify a little bit about community stabilization, I'm not going to kind of go through all of this. These slides will also be posted on the city website, so you can revisit them and review them. Again, you can kind of see what kind of the benchmarks and the metrics for community stabilization is. It's kind of a nice buzzword, but we want to actually know what that means and what that's going to kind of look like in practice. So we certainly do have historic preservation in Jamestown already. We have national historic districts, like the Downtown Historic District. We have the Lakeview Avenue Historic District, and we have our newest historic district in Forest Heights. And this accounts for about 5% of the city's residential building stock. Now, as far as our local historic districts, we have none. And this is simply because we don't have a local preservation ordinance that would either be driving this, accompanying it, or following the national designation as well. And we certainly have national historic districts, landmarks here in Jamestown. We've got our Euclid Avenue School, the Fenton History Center, the Jackson Center, the Partridge Sheldon House, also known as the Daughters of the American Revolution House, the Wellman Building, the Jamestown Armory, the the railroad station, also known as the Comedy Center. And our local historic landmarks, again, we have none because this has all been done on a national, for the National Register, not for our local preservation efforts. So a local preservation ordinance is just a local statute enacted to protect buildings and neighborhoods from unnecessary demolition or insensitive rehabilitation that adversely impacts the community. It also establishes a design review board, a preservation commission, and processes, all of which are critical for securing local historic designation. An LPO enables a community to protect its sense of place, maintain and revitalize its downtown and older neighborhoods, increase community pride, and reinforce overall economic development. An LPO fosters local businesses, keeping historic main streets and downtowns economically viable, stimulating investment and promoting tourism. So at one time, this was 31 South Main Street, and this is 31 South Main Street today. So again, some additional examples here. At one time, this was 500 Pine Street, and today 500 Pine Street is a parking lot. And so I just want to kind of emphasize what was there and how we use that space today. And at one time, this is what 313 Prendergast looked like. And now it houses a parking lot. So again, back in the day, 313, and today a place for our cars. And at one time, 518 North Main Street. And today it is our 7-Eleven. Originally and currently. We have 611 Prendergast. And again, we have another parking lot. So originally and currently, 303 West 3rd. Also part of our arena now. So downtown. And now we have the arena. And then we've got 139 Forest Avenue. And well, this time I think we got it right. So this is 139 Forest today. So originally and today. So certainly this kind of goes into those questions of how would an LPO affect my property? So one of the questions is, do you own a designated historic landmark here in Jamestown, or do you own a property that is currently located in one of the designated historic districts, whether you're in the Lakeview Avenue Historic District, the Forest Heights Historic District, or the Downtown Historic District? If you're not, then your property is neither protected by the LPO policies, and it's also not subject to the regulations of the LPO. If you are, then your property is protected by the LPO policies, and it is also subject to the LPO regulations. So again, another question that can kind of arise of what if I purchase a property that is not a designated historic landmark, it's also not located in a designated historic district, and I want to demolish that property. So one of the protections and regulations that would likely be included in an LPO that is fairly present, fairly standard in municipalities' LPOs is what they call a demolition delay. And the statute of a demolition delay would typically apply to buildings of a certain age that would be established and selected. So for example, any building over 75 years old, or any building or home constructed before a certain date, 1945. So again, that certainly hasn't been established yet, but that would be something that would be of discussion to be included in Jamestown's LPO. And so if your property fit those established criteria, your application for a demolition permit would trigger a review. And that review could result, again, depending on the outcome of that review, it could result in demolition delay. And that demolition delay is basically a required period of time for the potential property owner to seek alternative preservation solutions. It doesn't mean that that property cannot ever be demolished. It's really just instituting a period of time that provides a layer of oversight for seeking alternatives. So really demolition is a choice of last resort rather than first resort. And again, that's, oversimplifying things. But so just some 4 examples there. And again, I'm not going to walk you through all of this verbiage here either. Again, this will be on the city's website, and you can revisit the slides here. But just to kind of put these up here in terms of what the distinctions are between the work of historic preservation that we currently have in Jamestown, which is of the National Register of Historic Places, and what those distinctions would be for the LPO. And really the biggest difference is that the National Register listing allows property owners of a landmark or properties within a historic district to apply for financial incentives for rehabilitation work on their properties. And there's certainly an application that you need to go through and certain criteria that need to be met to qualify for those tax credits. But that's really the primary role of the National Register, where again, the local preservation ordinance is largely around providing that extra layer of protection in terms of what we might designate as significant and meaningful properties in Jamestown. And so that's all I have for now. And I'm happy to take questions and certainly go back to any and all of the slides if there's something to revisit.
Hi, Ellen. This is Pete Maraglia.
Yep. Hi, Pete.
Hi. Excellent presentation. I enjoyed that. I'm old enough to remember some of those buildings that you showed that are now gone.
Right.
I guess my question would be, how do you feel this is in reality going to impact Jamestown? Because from I grew up here. I came back after 40 years, but I bought an old building downtown 20 years ago, and I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to have been torn down. I guess my question is, I don't see this as a problem in Jamestown, that people are buying historic structures and wanting to tear them down for either a parking lot or new development. What I see more of is people buying old historic properties off of tax auction, not having the wherewithal to restore them or even rehab them.
Right.
And so I see that as the problem. I mean, this is nice. I mean, if someone wants to come and buy the furniture mart and want to tear it down for a parking lot or a parking ramp for the comedy center, yeah, I'd like to see some thought, serious, thought and another way of doing things there. But for the most part, I don't really see this as going to be applicable for the most part. I'd rather see something where the city did some type of an ordinance for boarded up windows, that they not use plywood. And nowadays, the cost of plywood is probably cost prohibitive. When I started my building, it's a 4-story building, and I had a whole side wall that faced an alley, which I wasn't ready to put windows in. So instead of boarding them up with plywood, I used cheap vinyl shutters, but it just helped present, a more appealing view of the building. Because in the long run, I was trying to attract tenants to the upper floors.
Right.
So I'd like to see something like that, or something like, some of these porches that get built onto houses, plywood.
Yeah.
They may or may not paint it, pressure treated wood that's not covered or painted. Because I think, I'd love to see what this ordinance would do if we really needed it. I think it'd be great to be on the books, because I'm an optimist. I really am. I'm very pro Jamestown, and I keep thinking we're going to turn a corner. and downtown plus the inner neighborhoods, because I think they're an integral part of downtown that needs to be really looked at and incorporated with them. You know, I'm talking 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. And I think you guys are doing that now. At least I think they're getting more attention there. But I would really, you know, I am optimistic. I keep thinking, well, you know, if Jamestown really starts to progress and we get these developers in here who want to invest, and this would be good. So maybe this is the point, is in preparation for this new bonanza. But right now we got developers who come in and they don't do anything with these buildings. You look at the Key Bank, you look at the one across the street from it, the old Marine Midland Bank. You look at the Windstream buildings. You talk about historic preservation, the old telephone company building. I mean, that is an absolute classic, and they're using it as a maintenance facility. Fortunately, they've not tried to do anything bad to it, but then again, they're really not maintaining it. And so I guess I'm in favor of what you guys are talking about with this delay and tearing things down, because maybe in the foreseeable future, that could be an issue. I don't see it as an issue right now. I see other areas that I think should be addressed, and it's code enforcement and you know, watching these buildings deteriorate to get on these owners. And I know, you know, from what I've seen over the last 20 years, they get a little pressure and stuff, and then they walk away. You know, the people, I don't have to name them. And then of course they go to tax auction, somebody picks it up, doesn't know what to do with it really, but I got it real cheap. But how much? I got to put 300,000 in it. So that's my 2 cents in it all. I think this is good. I don't think it's really applicable right now. If Jamestown kind of turns a corner and really starts to pick up, which I'm optimistic that it will in the next few years, I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I'll respond to you know, your references to the Furniture Mart building, the bank buildings, because in some ways, you know, as much as we're talking about both residential structures and commercial structures for that matter, you know, presently, if someone came in to buy one of the bank buildings and what they wanted to do with it was demolish it, we don't have any legal oversight to prevent them from doing that. And so in some ways, the very fact that however remote that possibility could be, the very fact that we don't have an LPO in place to protect that, to me, I think, well, we do need it now, because we don't want to leave that open for a developer who sees a different opportunity on that corner besides what's already there.
Well, I agree with you. I see the point, and in reality, I don't think anybody would buy that building just to tear it down because the lot's not big enough to really invest in. You're never going to get your return. They'd want to take probably half the block, which would be a shame, because I remember Brooklyn Square. I remember those buildings, and at the time I thought it was a great thing. Of course, I was like 16 years old, and because I mean it was so run down, and of course then the marketing. Retail was everything was going to the mall. Originally they wanted to put the mall down there in Brooklyn Square, which I don't think would have been good. The way it is now, I mean, the best thing out of it was the exposure of the river. And and I do give Sam Teresi a lot of credit for the Riverwalk development. I was talking to somebody the other day. I said, they really ought to name some park for him because he really did a nice job with that Riverwalk. Yeah. So anyway. But no, I get you, and I think this is probably a good first step. I do think there's some other things though, and really keep up the code enforcement and try to promote pride in the property owners. But I know we got a big tax auction coming up in June, and I'm just waiting to see what happens. Sure.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Ellen.
Chadwick, I think you have your hand up. Or not, if you were just agreeing with something, perhaps. All right. I'm certainly receptive to more questions or comments.
Hey, Ellen, it's Crystal.
Hey.
I just want to respond a little bit to some of Pete's comments. Hi, Pete. In regard to code enforcement, I think that the establishment of an LPO actually will help us when it comes to code enforcement. Having that ordinance on the books will give us just that much more ability to really enforce code violations, in particular to properties that fall within the criteria. So, you know, and I'm sure that most people on this Zoom are familiar and aware that, you know, code enforcement is one of our biggest challenges, especially in the past year with housing court being closed and really having our hands tied when it comes to actually being able to enforce code violations. So having something like this as an ordinance, and there are other things in the works that will, I think, really tie into this nicely, and just give it more, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but just kind of supplement, right? There are a lot of different things that we're working on without getting into the weeds here in the Department of Development, that this is just another tool in our toolbox that we're working on putting together. And I think that it will just tie in well with the other efforts that we're putting forward to take back our properties and take back our city. So I just wanted to put that out there. And Pete, I'm always happy to chat and kind of fill you in on some of the things that we're working on. I don't want to hijack the conversation, but I thought I would just add that little tidbit there.
All right, Crystal, I appreciate that. I know, you know, we've talked before, and just for the benefit of some of the others, I mean, my building is on 2nd Street downtown, and you know, in the last couple of years, we've lost 2 more historical properties for basically really minor stuff, which is roof problems and drainage problems. And I you know, I know I reported the building next door to me, the old Dugan's building. I mean, it was a plugged roof drain that stayed plugged for 2 years.
Right.
And now he's got probably $100,000 worth of damage in that back of that building. And it just blows me away to lose buildings for something as simple as a plugged roof drain.
Yep.
And that's the kind of stuff, I mean, it's minor, you know, people don't think about it, but the winters here are brutal. And these bricks, these old buildings, you know, they can't handle that freeze and thaw when there's water going down the back of those bricks. And it applies to wooden structures as well. That first picture that Ellen showed of the wooden house and whether or not you could rehab it, I voted demo it because I always look at wood structures as more unstable if they've been left to go for a long time. But you know, if you got the money, you can do anything. So anyway, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm in favor of what you're doing. I just and I hope, you know, we can address some of these things that seem minor, but they get out of control. And next thing we know, some great buildings are gone.
Yep.
Great, thanks, guys. All right, additional thoughts or questions? Going once, going twice. Guess I can leave you to the rest of your evenings then. So we will be holding another informational session on Tuesday. If you want to tune in again, see if there are other questions or thoughts that surface during that discussion. Otherwise, I thank you for tuning in, guys.
Okay, thank you, Ellen.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Hey, Mary.
Thanks, everybody.